朋友们，中国经济现在到底是好是坏？恐怕这是现在讨论最多，也是分歧最大的经济话题。就连国外的经济专家都自动分成了两派。相关的视频我放在节目的后半段。那为什么说分歧很大呢？因为双方的观点持有者都可以举出一堆的例子来佐证自己的观点。比如坚定的看空者会说，现在中国失业率非常的高，大学生毕业找不到工作是常态，而中年35岁之后就失业也是常态。中国的房价已经腰斩，餐饮行业呢大批的关门倒闭，老百姓普遍手里没钱，也不敢消费，经济怎么可能会好呢？但是看多者会说，中国科技一直在加速突破。这几个月来我们经历了太多振奋人心的时刻。从去年巴黎奥运会开始，黑悟空爆火，然后珠海航展出现一批高精尖的军品，随后6代机、450公里的高铁、各种电动车刷屏、DeepSeek 机器人、哪吒2等等一系列方方面面的成就让人眼花缭乱，仿佛处在高科技井喷、文化繁荣的黄金时代。如果这都算作经济完蛋，那全球所有国家都要完蛋。其实呢，我认为这两种说法呢都没有问题，但是他们都只代表了中国经济的一个局部面。这就跟盲人摸象是一样的，每个人呢因为所处的行业、阶层、社会经验各方面的因素，造成他对中国经济的认知存在着局限性，而不能很好的从全貌上去宏观的进行客观评述。那我自己呢，对于中国经济的看法不会直接的从好和坏去论述，因为这个话题呢已经负载了很多不必要的政治或者是意识形态的攻防，而失去了理性的讨论空间。所以呢，我更多的是从中国经济当前所处的阶段去讨论。中国现在的阶段，直白点讲，就是换挡加速期，而且正处在最关键的那几年。从2018年川普开始贸易战，到19年底疫情爆发，这2年是中国的准备期。在心态、思维和具体计划上来说经历了一个震惊、慌乱、失望、怀疑，再到犹豫、侥幸，最后是沉静下来，下定决心。当中国人决定迎难而上，必须自力更生往上走，在经济结构上进行重大变革，进入换挡加速期时，恰好疫情开始了。而疫情3年尽管对中国经济的打击非常大，但是另一方面其实也非常好的保护了中国。因为疫情的隔绝，使得中国开始进行的产业升级和经济动能转换进行得更加平稳顺利，没有引来西方的破坏。等到我们熬过了加速期的早期几年，慢慢在去年底今年初开始见证到初步成绩时，西方这才缓过神，开始吹哨，大声呼喊，中国人来了，中国已经领先了，太可怕了，他们要埋葬我们了。2024年到2027年这4年我觉得是中国转型升级最重要的4年。这当中呢，包含了例如房地产和低端制造业等传统或者是落后产业的出清和阵痛，以及随之而来的各种经济和就业问题。同时呢，也包含了更多新质生产力带来的突破和惊喜。而这些亮眼的新内容，正是未来中国经济发展的新希望。但因为刚发展没多久，还未形成足够的经济动能规模，使得绝大部分人还不能感受到新经济带来的收益。所以更多人只是从新闻上看到、听到，却无法从自己的生活、工作中感受到这些新变化。而这也是这个阶段的特点。如同早上4点半到5点半这一段时间，天开始微微亮了，看到了希望和曙光，但是整个大地还处在黑暗中，剩下的呢就是熬，天空会越来越亮的，直到大地彻底光明。今年的2025处在最关键的4年里，我们要做的就是熬，要承受敌人的进攻和破坏，要冷静和沉稳，熬到2027年，中国最关键几年结束了，中国经济呢也会从谷底爬出来， 届时各种新经济的力量开始明显的释放，那个时候中国又会进入一个新的繁荣期。之后呢，再过个2-3年，到2030年代，我们的转型将会彻底完成，成为世界最先进的工业产业顶级强国。到时候中国会用载人登月来庆祝和记录这一伟大的历史时刻。之后我们再好好发展个5年拉一拉汇率，各种经济指标在2035年左右正式跨入中等发达国家行列。所以整个20年代是中国经济披荆斩棘、历经万难、不断的开拓进取的奋斗年代，必然夹杂着失望、绝望和希望曙光。而随着时间的发展，会从负面消极占多数，慢慢变成正面积极占多数。今天站在2025这个中间年份的关口，面对未来何去何从的问题，我们心中要有信念和热情，坚持方能成就未来。接下来我们看看国外的经济专家是如何看待中国经济的。
Any industry that you care to think of, and the West has been leapfrogged. Literally any industry. Over 3 years, the 50-50 investor is the only investor who made money in China. It's the only investor in the world. The only investor who made money was in China. If you pick up the FT, the Wall Street Journal, you're told that China is imploding. And the recent collapse in Chinese bond yields feeds this narrative of an economy that's imploding. Now, China's obviously an emerging market. I see there's a few gray hairs in this room, people who've gone through a cycle or two. Out of curiosity, how many of you have experienced an implosion in an emerging market with collapsing bond yields? You have? Oh, sorry, because I haven't. Collapsing emerging markets leads to rising bond yields. It doesn't lead to collapsing bond yields. So there's something a bit off here. Now, look at the headlines that we've seen in China. This is just the headlines of the past 2 weeks. China releasing DeepSeek, which is basically a much cheaper version of AI that is actually outperforming ChatGPT, that is outperforming the Facebook AI. China releasing 6 fighter jets. Some of you may have seen 6 fighter stealth jets. China releasing a new 450-kilometer high-speed train, which is the fastest high-speed train ever released. China releasing a new space-to-ground laser, which basically has beaten Starlink to the punch and means that China is now moving towards 6G telecom standards. None of these headlines are what you would expect about an economy that's imploding. None of these headlines are telling you, like, economies that are imploding don't at the same time have technological breakthrough in industry after industry. Now, here's another funny thing. Honestly, before you look at this chart, how many of you in this room knew that last year China was the one major market that outperformed the US equity market? One person in this room. And this is a room of financially savvy people. You will be told all day that China is imploding, shown a collapse in Chinese bonds. Nobody will tell you, hold on, Chinese equities are doing fine. To the point where if you think of your typical investor being 50-50 invested, 50% in bond, 50% equities, that investor last year in China was up 25%. 50% equities, 50% bonds. That same investor in the US was only up 5%. In Europe, in Japan, in most other emerging markets, that investor lost money. And if you think it's a dead cat bounce, let's look over 3 years. Over 3 years, the 50-50 investor is the only investor who made money in China. It's the only investor in the world, the only investor who made money was in China. The 50-50 investor over the past 5 years has done just as well in China as he has in the US. Imploding bond markets have a cost. In the Western world, we've decided we're going to sacrifice our bonds to help our equity markets. In China, they've decided to focus on the bond markets, save the bond markets. And so you're now in a situation where if you look at the starting point right now, you have in China record low interest rates, government stimulus, record low real rates, and economy that is starting to reaccelerate with data picking up, including on real estate, and equity valuations in the bottom quartile. In the US, you have rising interest rates, record high valuations, interest rates that are rising. Where would you rather be? The place where interest rates are going up and valuations are high, or interest rates are low and valuations are low? You make your choice. Now, here's another couple charts for you. How many markets have you seen that are economically imploding where you have record car sales, record tourism, record restaurant sales? China today has record car sales. That's unusual, like for a place that is imploding. So how do we square this? How do we square this media narrative on the one hand and the reality on the ground that seems to be really quite different? If I can leave you with one chart today, I'd like it to be this chart. I'd like it to be this chart, which really illustrates what's happened in China over the past few years. The breaking point, the sort of turnaround for China occurs in 2018. In 2018, this is when the US government says nobody is allowed to sell semiconductors to China anymore. And this was a cold shower for the Chinese leadership. This is when they thought, okay, it's not a trade war, it's a tech war. The US is out to curtail our growth. It's semiconductors today. Tomorrow it could be car parts. It could be chemicals. It could be any number of things. We have no choice but to become self-sufficient in every single industrial vertical. Therefore, we tell our banks normal loans to real estate. What you're looking at, the red line, is loans to real estate. Instead, put all your money in industry. The banks were told this, and when the banks are told something, they typically do it. If you don't want to find yourself in jail for, one reason or another. And so you see this massive shift in the Chinese economy. Now, what the entire Western world focuses on is this red line right here. A red line that shows a massive real estate bust. And I think there's many reasons we focus on this, not least of which that we, the Western world, went through a real estate bust in 2008. And so we thought, we went through it in 2008. They're going through it today. I've seen this movie before. I know how this ends. Banks are going to implode, etc. Banks did not implode. In fact, last year, Chinese banks were the best performing banking sector in the world. Banks did not implode because they were lending somewhere else. And now we wake up 5 years later, 6 years later, 7 years later, and we wake up to all of a sudden a new reality where China is the biggest car exporter in the world, the biggest industrial robot exporter. China's producing better trains. China can produce nuclear power plants at half the cost that we can in the Western world. Pick any industry that you care to think of, and the West has been leapfrogged. Literally any industry. And even fighter planes now. Fighter planes is one of the hardest thing to produce. Here's the fun thing. While we're all focusing on the red line and talking all day about whether Shanghai real estate prices were going to go down another 10% or not, something that impacts absolutely nobody's life in here. This was happening. Now this impacts everybody's life and everybody's portfolio. Because if China is about to take over the global car market, this is very problematic for Germany, much more so than the Shanghai real estate price. This is much more problematic for Sweden if China takes over the industrial robots market, and so on and so forth. And it is happening.